right, welcome to another Totally Rewarding Chats. Besides my usual partner in crime here, Paul Reiman, we have Kathryn Gombos on. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. In the pre-show stuff that people didn't get to see, I'm like, hey, Paul, do you know Kathryn? And then why don't you really quick cover like how, we're going to call it small world and not how dumb I am kind of segment, how small the world is.
It's really code for Sean skipped an after party
Hmm.
at a conference because the way that Kathryn and I think are best known as collaborators were as the song rewriters for "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" at the after party of the Total Rewards conference in Cincinnati, where we decided to make "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" all about comp people and perform that in front of a crowd.
I am bummed I missed that. The fact that Sean missed and then insert any party uh, is probably fine because I am notoriously in bed early, up early. So you can insert any party there, but I'm actually bummed out I missed that because that weirdly sounds like it was fun.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you feel like you could sort of reprise every few years, right?
Hmm.
Like, because I think I'll have to dust it off, but I'm pretty sure what Kathryn and I put together is still pretty relevant to AI changing the game. We were kind of ahead of the curve there a little bit, and I said
see
AI
what you did
already.
there.
Yeah,
I
I
see
said
what you did there. Ah, that's great baseball. Look at that baseball pun.
you got it, you got it. So, and
Welcome,
then
Kathryn.
yes, Kathryn, welcome, thank you, and thank you for your collaboration over these years that we've known each other.
Yes.
And I'm going to rat her out. I have not known Kathryn that long, but I was lucky enough to sit with her at in Atlanta. Look at her face; she knows what's coming.
Sorry. Good.
She was freaking out so bad, Paul. She was about to do a presentation, and I didn't realize it was her first one. And I'm probably, to be honest, not the best person to sit next to before your first one because I don't really care what goes on. And she was amazing, though. You would never have known that it was her first one. I would never have known if it wasn't her first one. And actually, which led to this because it was on market pricing, and I'm like, you know what we need to do? We need to get her on now to talk about market pricing. But you were awesome.
Thank you so much. It was fun. It was a nice first step back. Good audience engagement too, which is great.
They were. So the way we start is give us your background and kind of how you got to where you are now, because that is very cool, and your little bio. And then at the very end of that, give us a hobby that you do, just kind of like a human captcha. We want to know you're actually a human.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks again, guys, for having me. I have been in the comp space, gosh, a little over a decade, but it was not how I got. I didn't start from college. I came through the world of sales into consulting. I spent a little bit of time in-house, and now I'm back in consulting. My work is primarily in the broad-based space, but building a team here who's got expertise in all of the different areas. And we have fun helping primarily mid-sized companies, and I just love comp. I think it's a really great space to be. I think it solves a lot of business and people problems, or at least has a nice lens on how to think about business and people problems.
And
Uh,
I think you're one of one, in my experience, of the career path to comp being sales.
right.
You don't get that a lot. You might get some sales to sales comp people, but sales comp specifically, and that's not necessarily the leap you made. So that's a particularly, one of one sort of transition. Like, hey, But I imagine that comes in handy just as you're influencing skills and problem solving techniques and consultative approach. Look at me,
Yeah.
comes to bear every day.
We're still hunting for that person that we find that was like, you know what I want to be in college? Or
Right.
in college out of high school, you know what I want to be? I want to be a comp consultant. So,
Yeah.
I want to be in comp. We're still waiting for that person. That's the unicorn we're looking for.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, the having lived under multiple sales incentive designs made me realize like there's intention on this, and I'm not sure that every company I worked for had a lot of intention because sometimes my behaviors supported the business needs, and sometimes it was like, probably could have designed that differently because I'm doing things to earn me money, but I don't know if it's benefiting you, the company. So then when Hager reached out and I really learned there was a world of comp, I said, okay, these are my people. They're thinking the way I'd like to think.
There you go.
Someone only in comp 10 years and use the terms hey group. That also. So.
Yeah. 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 But then outside of work, outside of the world of work, if you will, music is probably where I spend a lot of my free time. Music and working out. I think former college athlete, that'll never go away. I really like to stay sweaty and lifting heavy. But for the fun side of things, it's playing the guitar and singing. And I'm in a cover band with a bunch of dudes, average age 65, 70 years old. So it's really fun playing with folks that have been doing this for quite some time.
Might
I
be a
saw
mellow stage presence in the grand scheme of things, right? Like you bring that energy.
that explains a lot actually. With the you were doing your first one, but you were fine like in front of a group. The only thing, and actually, Paul, this is something I hadn't seen before. Hopefully, no one from Atlanta is down there. Luckily, I had just a fireside chat, but they had dueling clickers. So they had two machines, each thing loaded on it, and not the same one was on both. They like didn't put the update on one, so she had dueling clickers every time, which is an added, an added challenge.
Yeah, yeah. It was super fun when I realized that about 4 or 5 slides in. I was like, oh, one's not the updated version.
But how bad did I
Yeah, right.
I will say though, I'm not surprised a little bit, Catherine, that when you're performing music in front of somebody, especially covers, like they know the songs. You're just sort of there to carry them through the song they already know. A musician in the crowd might judge you a little bit, whereas comp people do not hesitate to disagree with you. Like there's this like acceptance vibe that does come up, I think, when you're presenting to a rewards audience that does not happen if you're a stage performer, right? Like especially for bands.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually funny too, thinking about Sean, you're calling me out for how I felt before I went out there. Not too dissimilar from how I feel before any of my performances, and I've been being in a cover band since, I don't know, 2012 or so. As soon as I get started, it all goes away, but the nerves are very present right before.
Sports, right? Like as soon as once a ball or whatever game's on, like
Yeah,
it's harder to watch and coach, especially as a parental unit. I think Paul, like watching, you can't like you're not in control. Like maybe that's a comp or this is industry kind of personality trait, but you're not in control anymore.
yeah.
Speaking of which, so the speed round. You ready to go?
Let's go.
Coffee or tea?
I am a tea person.
We've had switchers. We haven't had an actual like no coffee type response
Yeah,
yet. So look at you.
yeah. I like the smell of it, but I don't want to drink it.
That'll work. I'll drink it. Compa ratio or position and range?
If I
Say it
have to
depends. Don't
communicate,
do it.
I won't do it. But if I have to communicate with people about this, I think position and range is easier for them to understand.
This is going to be an important one for Paul and I. We've given you a weekend away. Are you going to take a posh weekend away, or are you going to go out in the woods and rough it and hang out in nature?
Nature. What news?
Side note: you won't be hanging with Paul.
That's right.
Yeah.
Roughing it is a down brand Marriott for my family. That's
Yeah.
for sure. Like,
Country or location you'd like to go to but you haven't been to.
Croatia comes top of mind. Yep, I say that because my sister she's very well traveled, says that's her favorite place in the world, and a new team member's husband's from Croatia, so it just seems to be kind of like around me a lot lately.
there's a sign.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. And then crunchy or creamy peanut butter.
Creamy.
Well, look, I'm all about the cream. You don't have to look with a sad face. People are listening. She had this sad face, like I had nothing to do with her answer, by the way.
I guess it was leading with crunchy made me feel like I had to pick. I don't know.
Yeah, I think before we started recording this, Sean, I think I would have predicted a correlation between the Ruffets and the Crunchies. I don't know why, but there is zero. If anything, it's the opposite. I don't get it.
That's true. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
So,
I like
so
that.
core stuff, and then we'll kind of dive in. So what I saw you present down there, Kathryn, the reason I want, I didn't realize Paul was easy once I said, how about Kathryn? Was the work you did around just market pricing. And so kind of give a definition of market pricing, and then, if you want to dive right in, that's fine if one of us doesn't interrupt you. But, what do you see as the best practices or the best use of it as you work with clients?
Yeah. All right, so high level, how would I define market pricing? I think it is understanding the market value of your jobs. Maybe that might be the quickest way of summing it up. How you do that can get nuanced, but I think also understanding the goal of market pricing is to really align your people's strategy with your business strategy, right? Like how are you going to attract and retain and motivate, drive the right behaviors as we talked about earlier through your pay practices. So I would say that's probably my definition for it. Or somewhere around there.
Let me jump before like talk. I made it all of like 35 seconds before I jump in here.
Yeah.
How often do you actually see companies aligning the business strategy to the market? To me, that's like one of the bigger misses I see a lot of times from companies. They want to go market price and just like check that box and move out. And so, I guess A, how often do you see it? And then B, how do you help companies do that? And what are the, necessary things to make that happen?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because how often do you see it is not always what you want to hear here. It's like usually they're, well, you tell me what it should be. And really diving into the conversations of like, all right, well, what are you trying to be when you grow up? What are you good at now? What are you testing? That's going to help us make decisions or make a recommendation for you. I also find that the business strategy is one component that's sort of difficult to create that strong link for some leaders, but then also do we have the right definition of the jobs, or are we clear on what the actual responsibilities and level of the role is? Because oftentimes we'll get in and say, we want to market price something and compare it to the market because they're being low paid or whatever the why is that brought them to you. And then you start to realize, well, they're not really low paid for what they're doing. You just have a different job description and title slapped on that person, which may make your talent acquisition people feel like they're low paid. The managers who want more performance out of them think they're low paid, but are you really designing the job the right way?
Yeah, there's definitely a link between sort of business strategy, comp strategy. There's something in between, and I don't want to get jargony around it, but we always ask the question like, well, okay, what's your business strategy now? How do people play into that? Right?
Yeah.
And is it certain roles matter more than others? Is it we need low cost labor to execute a low cost business strategy? Is it, innovation driving? Okay, that all those things are clues from a people talent perspective that now we can talk about. Okay, what does that mean for the type of work we need to structure, and as a result, the people we need to hire into that work, right? So I feel like there's 4 layers of that process that are difficult to get people to connect at times.
Yeah.
But it's essential if you're going to do sort of market pricing right. Yeah, sure, I can come up with some numbers, but the right numbers for you require clarity along that value chain, essentially.
Absolutely.
I think the notes from you, Kathryn, I always take it's interesting because I wanted, the goal was to talk to you about the best practices in market pricing, right? But before you do that, right, instead of making bad worse, I mean, you mentioned job architecture, job descriptions, aligning to the business, and I do think that's where that gap is. Even job descriptions, to your point of like, what is this job? What do they really do?
Hmm.
Or what do they say they do? And a lot of times the job description comes from the job posting, which is how do we get how do we advertise the job, which might not be, as many of us have found out, probably in different places, might not actually be what the job entails.
Yeah. Yeah. And doing your best to kind of avoid that bait and switch too, from the posting to the actual practice when they show up. Right. That's a lot of the times where the beginning of that problem is, where you start saying, well, then we need a market price as the solution.
So how often do you feel that when you step in and look at different clients, most of them are mid-size, that you have to almost take that step back to get the foundation prepared to do market pricing?
Oh man, I feel like most of the time I want to take that step back and sort of dive in a little bit deeper with them as I start to uncover things where it's like, well, why do we have a 250% market index? Do we have the right job here? And then you start to learn a little bit more. Um, I think that really honestly depends on the appetite of leadership and whether they're really willing to face, whether or not their strategy is well communicated or well defined. Um, and oftentimes it's kind of like, well, let's make the best of what we have in front of us now, which is to see what we can do to clean up the comp side and then work the stakeholder management and the buy-in to engage on is this really the right job and org design?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't done as obviously as much as you all from the consulting side, but I think my premise has always been if you don't align the business strategy, I hate to say this, you can get away with it. It's not the best case, obviously we're saying that, but if you don't have the jobs right and everything, why am I even here? But also, what are you going to communicate as a result? Because obviously, if you have me market price these jobs and they're too high, start to scare them a little bit. Like, do you really want to go tell everyone you're paying at 30th percentile? And
Right.
no, I'm like, so don't you want to know if you have a problem or not? And then then what you do with it is fine. But actually, why risk it and not do it right?
Yeah.
But you're right on the pushback, the dollars. Well, how much extra is it going to be to get the job architecture to align to my business strategy to do whatever? And actually, they seem to understand the market pricing piece when I've done that work. Like I get it. I want to pay right for the right job. And then they're like, in a nice way, but screw off. We don't want to anymore, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, especially because, sometimes, especially if you start to find that the client might think they need some bespoke or custom job architecture, right? Those become very lengthy efforts. We're not talking months. Sometimes they can be years, depending on the size of the organization too. So yeah, I get the lean towards like, good enough. Let's keep it moving. And then let's get market pricing as well done as possible, given that context.
So now that we've done that, we've got as good as possible, or because we don't have an actual client right now, blue skies, rainbows, and unicorns, we have everything we want aligned. What are the best practices for companies when they start to look at market pricing, from sources of data to doing the math to all of that?
Yeah, yeah. Paul, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. And I mean, I think it starts with sort of knowing what is your target market and then finding the right surveys for that. I think that's a good place to start, right? If you want to target, the SaaS industry, but you're going to go and look at a financial data set, it's like, maybe not the right data set. Or if you're looking, to do global pay, but you're only going to purchase US data, right? Then, it's going to be less tailored or less, specific to what you're looking for. So I think defining the right market for you and then finding the right data sources that support that is a really great place to start.
Yeah, I always, market pricing ultimately is an estimation process, right? Like there's no such thing as like the number that says this is what to pay. So you have to think of it as what's the right sample of data for me to make that estimation. And, industry, location, segment of an industry, employer size, like who are you really competing with? And don't be generic, I think is one of the key best practices for me. Like, oh, we're a life science company. All right, be more specific about that. Are you a pharma development company? Are you a manufacturing company that happens to make life science things? Are you basically a consulting organization into life sciences as a clinical research organization? Or, right, I could say life science for all of those, but I can tell you they pay probably 15% different in different directions depending on who you really are. So the more specific you can be about who do you compete with or talent, and the answer might be everybody in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? Fine, but be clear about that, because then you can do a better job of finding data to indicate what that market value might be.
Yeah, I think being a simpleton, Paul, I kind of asked the question, where do you get people from and where do you lose them to?
Mm-hmm.
And so for each role, because at that point, there's some roles where you're like, to your point, it's Charlotte, like it's entry level, like I don't really care, and so don't corner yourself in a niche. Doesn't matter what size. And then to your point, like there's some roles that are really niche, and you're like not good enough. Where do you actually get them from and
Yeah.
lose them from, type of thing.
Yeah.
And when there's pushback on that work, usually for me it's always like you want to work the right problem when you're done, and that's kind of my thing. Because in your case of point, there's a 15% delta. If you think you're paying it, P60, and people keep leaving, you start working a turnover issue, but you're actually paying below median, and it's a pay issue, right? And so you got to get that right.
That's right. And I think people forget quickly, some industries get it, others forget quickly about how important location actually is. So for comp people, we'll often say, maybe it doesn't matter, there's lots of remote opportunities. But if you're in the sub $30 an hour talent market, location is actually your primary dimension, right? It doesn't matter what kind of company you are. If you're on the western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, like there's only a couple of employers that people can commute to, and you've got to know that. So it's like don't oversimplify kind of who your market is. You really need to be segmented and specific to make sure you don't jump to conclusions that are going to make it hard to attract the right people.
Absolutely. I love to thinking about this as sort of two lenses. So we've talked a lot about kind of that talent profile, right? Like who you compete with for talent. But sometimes it's okay for organizations to say like, we're going to pay for who we are, our organizational profile. And so I like kind of having those conversations too, and potentially looking at kind of both data sets to say like, well, here's a story with both of them. Now let's see if we can hone in on that people strategy, and does this data help us make a decision on where we want to be when we're competing?
And where I think that's really interesting because I think then you get them to force the issue of like, no, 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 we're going to be who we are, and we're like, that's fine. So we're going to be a high turnover place. No, that's not what we want. Where you can't have these two things potentially, right? So I think it makes for great discussions that way. So I think that's a really good point. Where do you see it go wrong? Yeah, you're laughing. You're laughing, but I'm
It
going to go
never
on
goes wrong for Kathryn.
market
It's
pricing.
always right.
Paul's right. Yeah. No, there's always, it's just rainbows and butterflies over here. Um, where does it go wrong? Sometimes I think one of the kind of more difficult it goes wrong is when you start dealing with sort of maybe department level leaders who say, but I really just want to look at this very narrow data set. Like, okay, well, now we have 5 incumbents to review. Do we want to maybe pull this up and having to have that conversation and help them understand like the statistics side of comp and why you want a bigger sample and what this data and the different cuts and the different percentiles mean to kind of help them pull out of very narrow looks at the data. It's one
Yeah,
thought.
I put it in the category of missed expectations, right? Where people are expecting market pricing to be something it's not going to be, right? It is still an estimation process. Like you want to be specific, you want to be thoughtful about what data you use, why you're using it, but it's yeah, but what does Google pay? Well, that's not here. Like that's not a thing. There is data we can use to point at that. Sure, look at postings. There's some things that you can do to be indicators, but you can't answer that question. Like that's just not how it works. And if you're expecting magic out of market pricing when it's really just an estimation of what a market is doing, you know, people aren't stock
I
tickers.
usually tell people it's the number. The answer is a number nobody makes, um, right? Because it's an estimate. It's the ballpark. I think the other piece, Paul, and that where it goes wrong is that it's the answer. It's the data point to help you, do other things in my mind. But at the end is not this magic, portal to all things will be solved by doing market pricing. And the only other thing I'll add, and I don't know if you've seen it, is where it really goes wrong in my mind is where they have kind of the most junior person fly solo to do it because it's a very rote thing, right? And it's just math, right? The maths work out, but the art of making sure it's the right jobs and that stuff, because the math doesn't matter which one of the three of us do the math if everything else was fine. The number's the number, right? But that's where I think it gets missed too. Is that you know I'm just going to do the math as opposed to creating the foundation we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
I also find it goes horribly wrong when people know the answer. And I put that in little air quotes if you're listening, right? Like, I know we're paying low. Well, guess what the data is going to tell you? You do, because you will manufacture that outcome, right? So when there is an openness to what does the data say, that it's just going to lead you astray. Because then, okay, well, I know we're paying low. So clearly we don't have that job leveled correctly. So now let's change the level of that job. But it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like you mess up the whole construct if you enter with an answer rather than a question. And you got to get people off that quickly when they just know the answer.
I think it's one of the interesting bonuses, and I know you guys can't say this, to using a third-party consultant. Because you're in that place where if you don't have the gravitas or the leverage inside the company to ask those questions, you can ask those questions. I mean, don't get me wrong, worst case, you get fired. But you don't have to then go to work for them. You don't feel the pressure from them, or this is the answer. Like, they paid you to do it. And it is, I don't want to say few places, but I will definitely go on the hill of like, when you're dealing with especially grading and leveling to make sure you then market price and do things right, having someone from the outside come in and ask why, I think there's huge bonus to that. And just not biased, right? Because if I just kept hearing Paul is, an SVP, Paul's an SVP, Paul's an SVP, and then I look at his job description, I'm like, oh, he's actually like a senior manager. You know, he just acts professional.
I
It's
do.
rainbows and butterflies, but
Yeah.
so but that's the thing where you can go in and you objectively look at it. So I think that's another piece for people to think about. Even in the grading, you can then market price yourself. Like not to take money again now away from you. Now that I said use parties, to me, if you had to pick somebody to do something, that piece is really, really important. It's foundational.
Yeah. The only thing I'll agree, but is it's actually the leveling. I think is where folks like Kathryn and I can be more helpful because the data is the data, and tech is pretty good. It's the no, that job really isn't a WTW M6 because that's reserved for this kind of job, and we know that other orgs match it this way. Like it's that perspective where they've convinced themselves they need to sort of level a job up because it reports to our whatever, and we can kind of say no, that's not how this works. Like if you look at the data, there's not that many companies, there's not that many people reporting to that role, you're matching it wrong, right? So I find our push on the level ends up being more valued than like a specific data call out, because it's just hard to argue with. Like once you've agreed a job is a whatever, a P4, like the number's the number
The
to some
perspective
extent.
you bring from multiple clients, getting to, I mean, it's just getting to see a lot out
Yeah.
there, right? I mean, it's just perspective.
Yeah, and I'd say even the participating in salary surveys, the ones that'll push back that same way as a consultant or practitioner, you start to get more credibility or feel that data is more valid because it's like, oh, they're going to check whether or not the level we said it is makes sense. So it's nice.
So let me kind of spin out to, because Paul, topic Paul will hate. So if we talk about comp tech, right, and all the technology in this space, I kind of have two questions. You can pick and choose where you go. I think one, how do you see technology playing, more and more in market pricing? And the one that always spins out for me for that, I don't know what order you want to tackle them, is there's more and more data options out there now. So from surveys, and so how do you see companies kind of weighing those and using tech to put them together and marry them and look at the curve over time? And, the one thing, at least I haven't seen many companies get is a lot more budget for data. So there's a lot more options, just no more money. So I don't know where you want to start with that, but I will let you start anywhere you would like.
I would say with the tech, I think it's nice to kind of not have to rebuild the spreadsheet from zero every single time, which, is kind of like the old days. When I think about like Hey Group, when I first started, it was like, okay, we would learn how to do this stuff on graph paper to like just really understand it. Then you learn how to do it in Excel. And now that we have technology, it's kind of like, okay, we don't have to really start from nothing with the Excel. A lot of the kind of cleanup is built into the tool. So I like the efficiency side of it. Yeah, I guess that's really where my head goes to start with answering that question.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think, and then what's the so what then? I think so.
yeah.
Yes, I agree. Like it's miserable to start from zero on the spreadsheet. So you save some time, right? So I think the big play then is you could spend less time sort of moving data and more time critiquing that data, right? Um,
Well said.
ask the question, well, why do we have so many people benchmarked to a P6 when that really should be a rare role rather than so much energy going into just getting it matched and compared, and you take that big deep breath and you're glad it's done and you don't want to look at it again. Like you can move to those different value add activities that aren't just data moving. I think that's the primary thing we hear from most people when they move out of spreadsheets and into something. Doesn't even matter which tech, but to getting into something,
Yeah.
that's the big gain out of spreadsheets is
Well,
the
a lot of them have that Rosetta Stone in their lap, right? Or a job architect. And so you get kind of to your point earlier, when you put a job in the job description, it kind of says, hey, this is a P4. And you're like, well, we have it at a P6, so it kind of calls that out. And I think the other piece I'd be curious if you're seeing is with more tools, the ability, that time savings, you can use more specific surveys or data sources or whatever for the same amount of time. Money's the issue, right? I mean, money's the issue to buy more surveys. So are you seeing more companies start to try to leverage more data sources?
Yeah, I mean, I think money in this current economic condition, maybe not right now, but yeah, it was sort of trending in that direction where maybe before it was one or two surveys made you feel like you've got a good sense of the market. Now I'm seeing kind of more like two to three, three-ish is probably especially because the technology, to your point, right, makes it easier to kind of be able to pull all that into your analysis.
Yeah, we're going to re-survey on this. We did one a year and a half ago, or it's coming up again in the spring. We're going to ask people that question. I mean, and what we had been seeing prior to early 2025 was some swapping, right? You might have used 3 big surveys, and now you decided maybe I'll do 2, and I'll experiment with what people described at the time as an alternative data source, whether it's a real time sort of software delivered data, offers based data, job posting data, who knows, but something to give you insight into that next vector of change of pay. I don't know if that's holding up, right? Because there's some like just don't mess with it. I don't know if my budget's going to get cut, so I may as well just keep what I've got and and tough through it. Because I don't know if we're seeing people spend a ton less. We're just seeing them not spend more, and I think the natural trend is you just don't change anything. Like
My hypothesis is, to get the updated, is the budget's not changing, right? To your point, Kathy, the market's not good, so whatever I had to spend, and so you've got a couple of things going. You don't want to change all your sources, and the numbers all bounce all over the place. So now, to your point, Paul, it's like, which one do I change out, and can I get 2 or 3 niche surveys or some data points that will cover some areas that are very specific back to our biology thing? Do I grab a third point? Do I every other year 1 or 2 of the other surveys and use that money? So I think change is, it'd be interesting, Paul, because I'm not in charge of your survey, what they are doing and what they would like to do to test would be interesting, because there is this, everybody's out there with all different types of data, and I can get my head around why you would want to use each piece and the pros and cons, but there's nobody doing it for free. So that's the fundamental problem.
yeah. Yeah, we know there was lots of curiosity and interest, particularly in posting based information over the past couple of years, because it's new, right? Like the prevalence of that data is going up, and there's no doubt it is alluring to be able to search for a name, right? And know this is what insert name of company thinks they want to pay that job, right? So there has been a ton of interest, but it's not free. And I think we've even said you don't replace your survey data with that. It needs to be a supplement. So it's just how do you make that work in a no cost increase environment?
I could see it on the hourly side a little bit. So depending where you get your surveys, because it's they post what they post for that role. But to your point, and you can do some cool things with zip code searching and etc. for entry level jobs, right? Because to your point earlier, I just meant they're coming from Charlotte, right? And it's this 20 companies in Charlotte or whatever, like it doesn't matter. But I think I'm with you on the other side. Like as they move up, it's a gut check, or to be honest, it's good for comp to know what, because TA's over on the other side saying I have to pay more and going to cause problems later because of these jobs, and you're like, actually, I have all the jobs you think you just looked at, and here's the ranges. But again, if you're not going to replace anything, but you're going to get access to those tools,
Yeah.
money.
Well, it's like Kathryn, you came from sales, right? It's like knowing your competitors, at least their list price, right? Like
Yeah.
you're aware of how they're talking about their price. It doesn't necessarily mean that is how they're going to negotiate that deal with, the same customer you're talking to, but it's great to know where you think they compare to you. You still got to make a choice. It's got its own limitations, but it's a great indicator for sure.
Yeah, well, and I like that it solves for the fact that kind of the validated and reputable sources are a lagging indicator of the market, right? They're behind and by intention. But now we've got some kind of data to sort of challenge the TA, desire for the pay to be raised, and the manager who always thinks it's not high enough, right? But
To be honest, employees market price themselves on job boards, right? I mean, for lack of a better source. So I think even from that perspective, being in the know, and how they actually pay, and not, Paul, like being armed with that communication. I like the way you put it. Don't get a big head, but I like the way you put it around, just being in the know and how they're positioning and how others are positioning. Even I think what's interesting is a lot of companies don't look at their own. So you're like, actually, we're positioning the same way, Paul. So, we're positioning the same, but that's not necessarily what we pay.
Totally. I mean, my favorite analysis I ever did, actually, I didn't do it, I just let it, but was we looked at Glassdoor data for our own company and compared it to what we actually paid to say, look, whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It was more right than people thought it would be, right? Like most employees are pretty good at knowing what their salary is, and it just so happened that company had relatively clear titles. So it was kind of easy to say, well, that's the job they're talking about. You know, it tended to be just a little bit different, right? So I'm like, let's make an assumption then that most other companies are going to be like us. And as a result, we can't discount it completely. If an employee says, well, on Glassdoor, my title says I should be paid this, there's enough truth to it that we have to respect it. Doesn't mean we have to agree. Doesn't mean we have to change their pay, but we have to respect it. And I think postings are kind of the same way. There's no doubt they are expectation setters, and awareness of it, particularly if you've got a specific set of companies that you compete with a lot. Good to know. Like, it is helpful information to know what's going on out there, and who's likely to come ask you a question about their pay is, you know, where you're seeing gaps relative to that, for sure.
Yeah, and I like when that conversation happens because then it opens the door to say, okay, well, cash is one component. Let's talk about all the other things that are part of this total reward mix. And that really, you know, we've seen the engagement data, right? It's not usually about cash. It's about other things, but cash is that kind of quick fix or the problem that we feel like we need to fix every time.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess I have two more things. The last question I always ask, but you know, what the big thing about market pricing, like if everyone could leave with, you know, if everyone just fast forwarded to this point, you know, so they didn't have to listen to me so much. You know, what was the one takeaway if you're talking about market pricing?
I think the one takeaway I would say is make sure you are pretty sure about what your jobs are actually doing, and that you've got good survey that supports where you compete or who you want to be in terms of a pay program.
I'm going to follow up on that with a zinger question. So does AI help or hurt the understanding what your jobs are actually doing, right? Like there's a lot of chat about how AI is going to do your job architecture for you and sort of solve this problem. But like, how would you respond if somebody came to you and said, well, can't I just like chat GPT my way to understanding these jobs better? How would you reply?
Man, can't I just chat GPT my way? I mean, bit of a garbage in, garbage out kind of, you know, scenario. Right? So sure, if your job descriptions actually reflect what the work is on the floor, yeah, AI is going to help you market price a lot quicker. It'll at least give you, you know, 60, 70% of the way for you to just spot check. However, if you're getting into those conversations with those people who are doing the work and they say, I'm actually not a senior biologist working with cells, I'm cleaning fridges. I don't care that biologist JD says that, right? I need to market price you to a technician or to lab support. So I think it's helpful if we've got that garbage coming out. Well, you know what I'm saying. If it's good stuff coming in.
Yeah. No, I get it. Just today, you know, Google AI mode, somehow it was suggesting I search for something I had talked to my wife about. I'm like, oh, it was listening, right? Like I didn't search for that. It was listening. So I have this like deep fantasy of, can AI just follow an employee around and sort of watch what they do and hear what they do and then describe the work? Now I'm interested, right? Because now you've spied on the employee and discovered that they were inside that fridge cleaning it all day. They weren't doing this. Like, wouldn't that be scary, by the way, if like AI just told us what we did all day? but it would solve the problem. We'd finally know.
I'd like to put myself on the list to not beta test that.
Yeah, I'm opting out.
I didn't opt in, but clearly it was doing it already. Like it literally the third little bullet in like, do you want to search this today? I'm like, oh my gosh, I just talked about that, but I have never Googled that before.
That, by the way. I think, yeah, I think she uploaded it to see what you were doing all day.
Also possible.
Yeah.
All right, Kathy. So totally all of HR, if you could automagically, which is a highly technical term, automagically fix anything in HR, all of HR, what would it be?
Okay, I'm of two minds. One, in HR, we have the opportunity to sort of influence and improve leadership behaviors. So if I could wave a magic wand there and make all people great leaders, well, how about that? But I think kind of more practically is just kind of finding every opportunity to make something repeatable, a little bit more kind of automated and transparent. I think there's a lot of wins that we're not capitalize in HR by just thinking that way. Like, let's repeat this, make it automated, and find ways to be transparent about it.
That's very cool. Well, I appreciate you jumping on. And I again, I should have. I didn't realize you knew Paul. I should have texted you first if it was going to be okay to hang out with Paul.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you for including me.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. Yeah, thank you, Kathryn.
Of course.